Hi, this is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I'm here today with a tag video. This is a fun one, the Nightclub Tag. It was originated by Brian at BellTube, and I have not been to his channel yet, so I will definitely be doing that before I post this video. Thanks for creating such a fun tag, Brian. And I was actually tagged twice for this one by Book Chat with Pat and by Talia Nerds Out. I watch both of their channels pretty frequently, so if you haven't been to their channels yet, I encourage you to check them out. So when I first saw this tag on those two channels, I thought, and I saw that I had been tagged, I thought, I can't do a nightclub tag. Clearly, I have not been in a nightclub in a very long time. And even back in the day, admittedly, I was a pretty wild partier, but yeah, nightclubs weren't really my scene. I was more of a dive bar kind of girl. Dollar pitchers in college, and yeah, and we had our favorite dive bar in New Orleans too, with a great jukebox, and at around, I don't know, 1 or 2 in the morning, there's a pool table, but around 2, 3 in the morning, they would bring a big wooden cover that they had made specially for this purpose. Put it on top of the pool table to protect the pool table so that we could dance on the pool table. So that was more my kind of scene. The place where you don't want to wear good shoes because they're going to get beer spilled all over them. But it turns out you don't actually have to visit a nightclub to enjoy this tag. And besides, all of that is very far in my distant past. Okay, so question 1. Cocktail hour. Name a book that you think pairs perfectly with your favorite drink. Well, because of my chronic illness, I haven't been able to drink alcohol in 22 years. So my favorite drinks generally are water and herbal tea. However, I have recently discovered flavored seltzers, non-alcoholic, no sugar. I can't have sugar either. Flavored seltzers. And so they have added some pizzazz and some new flavors to my drinking life. So I thought I would go with the flavored seltzers. And for that, the book, actually a pair of books that immediately came to mind were the 2 audios that I just finished at the end of August, House in the Cerulean Sea and Somewhere Beyond the Sea by T.J. Klune. Somewhere Beyond the Sea is the sequel to The House in the Cerulean Sea. They were both fabulous. I think they fit this prompt and my flavored seltzers because they are bubbly and fun and have lots of different flavors. And by the way, if you're a fan of the House on the Cerulean Sea, but you haven't yet read Somewhere Beyond the Sea, I highly recommend the audios for both. Outstanding. I just wrote a review of the 2 of them on my blog yesterday, and when I went to look up information, I was certain they were full cast audios because of all the different voices. They're done by one very talented actor narrator, so highly recommended. Okay, question 2, neon lights. Name a book with a cover that immediately grabbed your attention like bright lights in a club. So for me, that usually means nature. That's what grabs my attention. From the moment I saw This Tender Land by William Kent Kruger, I was just in love with the cover, and all of his covers are just beautiful. And the whole time I was reading it, I kept flipping back and looking at the cover. Question 3, The Bouncer. What book did you have to put down because it just wasn't letting you in? So I had to think about this one for a while. If you watch my channel regularly, you know that I don't often DNF a book. And the few that I have DNF'd over the years, I've talked about quite a few times on my channel. So I've probably talked about this one before, but I chose Fates and Furies by Lauren Groff. I read it for a book group, and I was only halfway through when we had our discussion. And once we had our discussion, I was so happy to just return it to the library and not finish it, which is so unusual for me. I enjoyed her novel, Arcadia. Honestly, I've been afraid to try some of her others. Fates and Furies just, like the prompt says, it just didn't let me in. I didn't like either of the main characters, didn't really care what happened to them. I was just not engaged in it. So it's rare, but it does happen once in a while. Question 4, DJ's Choice. What book would you recommend as the perfect read for someone new to the fantasy genre? Well, of course, the first thing that came to mind, and I am not a big fantasy reader, so I don't read much fantasy. But the first book that came to mind was The House in the Cerulean Sea, or basically anything by T.J. Klune. His books are just so beautiful and warm-hearted and funny and yes, magical, but I was okay with the magic. But I already talked about that, so I chose a different book. So the one I chose is The Snow Child by Owen Ivy. This is a beautiful, beautiful book. I've read it twice. I think probably once for a book group and once on my own, or maybe twice for different book groups. In either case, I loved it both times. And it is kind of fantasy, magical realism, which is not normally my thing, but surprisingly, I loved this book. It is beautiful and warm, and yeah, I think it's the perfect entry to someone who, like me, who doesn't normally read fantasy. Prompt 5, Disco Ball. Name a book that made you feel like you were part of a vibrant, glittering world. I don't think I read a lot of books like that, so I had to kind of go pretty far back on my blog to find something that I thought fit well with this question. What I chose was The Mambo Kings Play Songs of Love by Oscar Huelos. It won the Pulitzer Prize in 1990, and he was the first Latino to win the Pulitzer Prize, so that was quite an achievement. I did not read it when it first came out. My mom did, and told me it was great, and gave me a copy, and like too many of my books, it sat on my shelf for too many years. But when I finally read it, with my book group, I really enjoyed it, and so did most other people in the group. Now, in terms of being a vibrant, glittering world, parts of this book are difficult and sad. It's about Cuban immigrants to America, but the central part of the book, the parts about Cuban music, and particularly this band, the Mambo Kings, in the 1950s. It's a fictional band, but based on many real-life Cuban bands, mambo bands. Those sections, the author just completely immerses you in that lush, vibrant world of the dance halls. It's the 1950s in New York City. The dance halls, the clothes, the music, you really feel immersed in that world. Question 6, Dance Floor Diva. What book had you dancing with excitement from the first page to the last? So for that, the first thing that came to mind was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I've often talked about this because it's one of my favorite books, and I can't tell you much about it. It begins with a school teacher waking up on a spaceship a long ways from Earth. The two companions with him are both dead. And this is in the very first pages. You can't tell any more than the first few pages of this book without spoiling it. And the teacher eventually realizes he is responsible for saving all of mankind. But none of that is what makes this book so delightful, what made me dance with excitement all the way through. There is another element to this book that is just fabulous, that the whole time I was reading it, I was exclaiming out loud, laughing out loud. It's also very funny. Luckily, my husband had already read it, and he does not like to talk about books. He loves to read, but he's not a big discusser of anything really, but in particular books. But while I was reading this and he would hear me gasp or laugh or say, oh my gosh, he would immediately say, where are you? What part is it? It's that good. Prompt 7, guest list. Which author would you invite to an exclusive book-themed party and why? So my favorite author is Barbara Kingsolver. She's got a little section here on my favorite shelf. I've loved all of her books, particularly her earlier books, but then last year she came out with Demon Copperhead, which is just a spectacular novel. If you still haven't read it, you really need to. And it's another one that is fabulous on audio. So besides the fact that I love her writing and I love her books, I think Barbara Kingsolver would also be a wonderful person to have dinner with because I also love her values, her love of nature, her respect for the environment, her love for the region where she grew up in Appalachia, which is what Demon Copperhead is all about. Yeah, I think she would be a wonderful dinner guest, and I think we'd have a lot in common since I love the outdoors so much too. Question 8, VIP entrance. Which book did you feel privileged to read before it became more widely popular? I knew exactly what book to pick for this question from the first time I heard this tag video. I was a professional book reviewer for a long time, couple of decades, for Family Fun magazine, for Publishers Weekly, and for Shelf Awareness. While I was working for Shelf Awareness, besides reviews, I also did a lot of author interviews and other articles for them as well. So back in 2018, I had the pleasure of interviewing Delia Owens about her new debut novel, Where the Crawdads Sing. Now, at this point, it was an ARC. No one had ever heard of it before. Wasn't even sure I'd like it. And of course, neither me or the author had any idea what a huge splash it would make, how popular it would be, what a hit it would be, that there'd be a movie made from it. So I had a wonderful discussion with the author. So a lot of the authors I interviewed around that time for Shelf Awareness, I enjoyed their books, but their books didn't hit the bestseller list the way this one did. So that is the one that comes to mind. She was absolutely delightful to talk to. I really enjoyed our interview. One of the things she shared with me was where the title of the book came from. I asked her about that, and she said when she was a young girl, growing up in South Georgia, in an area very similar to the ecosystem where the Crawdads Sing is set in coastal North Carolina. She and her friends would play outside a lot, but she said her mom would say, if they were hanging around the house too much, her mother would say, go way out yonder where the crawdads sing. And she remarked, maybe she was just trying to get us out of the house. But she did say my mom was a real outdoor girl, and she wanted us to get out into nature and learn about wildlife. which set her on a whole track for her life, because she's written several nonfiction books about her time in the wild in Africa. So yeah, so that's just a little inside story. I will link down below to my interview and review. It was just really cool then to watch the book explode the way it did. She did say back then that she was working on a second novel, completely different but with some similar themes. So I haven't seen that yet, but I'm looking forward to it. Okay, question 9, dance battle. Which two characters from different books would you love to see face off in a dance battle? This is the question I had the most trouble with. I guess I just don't read the kind of books where there's very much dancing. I mean, I looked through all 18 years. I mean, I searched all 18 years of my book blog for dance and dancing. Mambo Kings is the one that came up with some dancing in it, but the main characters were musicians, not dancers. Yeah, so I just went with something silly. And I hope that works. So I chose two completely different characters for completely different reasons. Donna's the main character in Firekeeper's Daughter, because I would love to see some of the Native American dancing that her tribe did at the powwow. That would be really cool. And the costumes. Reading this book, I was looking up so many things online while I was reading, because including the jingle dresses, because I wanted to see what that was like. So she'd be one of my dance competitors, and the other one's really silly. Henry from The Time Traveler's Wife. I'm not even sure if he dances at all in the book, but I think it would be amusing because he'd probably disappear in the middle of it, especially if the dance battle got heated and was stressful. So there you go. Question 10, Midnight Read. What's a book you couldn't put down and ended up reading all night? Okay, well, that's impossible for me these days. Yeah, once a year I stay up until midnight, New Year's Eve. Sometimes I barely make that, and I'm in bed by 12:15. Yeah, I can't do that. So I had to go back. I've been sick for 22 years, so I had to go way back. And before that, I had young children, so yeah, I went way back. I might have done that at some point in my teens. And at that point, my family, my mom and dad and I were really into Stephen King. And his are the kind of books that could keep me up reading all night long, or most of the night. So I don't know if I ever actually did it, but here are two of the early ones. I think these are the original copies that we had when I was a kid. The Shining and The Dead Zone, two of my favorites. It's entirely possible that I stayed up most of the night reading one of these at some point. For a more contemporary answer, for me, staying up late reading means past 11. If I read until like 11:15 or 11:30, I'm probably going to be hurting the next day. I can't drink, but I definitely feel hungover the next day if I stay up too late. But the book that did that for me this summer was The Ferryman by Justin Cronin. I definitely stayed up past 11 once or maybe even twice while reading this, because it was so gripping and so full of surprises and unexpected. Question 11, After Party. What book left you with a hangover, unable to start a new read immediately after finishing it? There you go. The hangover theme continues. So this happened to me just this summer. So this was an easy one, with The Women by Kristen Hanna, which I listened to on audio. And that book, especially on audio, it was so immersive, so powerful, so moving, so much emotional depth that I could not listen to another audiobook. I think I took almost a full week's break from audiobooks and just caught up on podcasts because I didn't want to stop living in that book. It was just so good. Question 12, late night conversations. Which book left you thinking deeply or wanting to discuss it with others late into the night? So for thinking deeply, for me, science fiction thrillers are usually the kind of book that it's why I love them so much. Time travel, yes, but any kind of science fiction, particularly that plays with time in any way. So I thought of Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. Loved this book. It's about, as you can kind of tell from the cover, it's about alternate universes. Mind-blowing stuff. Luckily, my husband had read it first. And again, he's not really into discussing books, but, you know, this one is so intriguing. He was willing to talk about it a bit. And we just watched the TV adaptation of Dark Matter on Apple TV, and it was outstanding. And it had been a few years since we'd read Dark Matter. So again, that got us talking too. And finally, number 13, tag some people. So as usual, I went to some channels that are maybe lesser known, that have under 500 subscribers. I think maybe all of these I discovered either this summer or shortly before that, and thanks in large part to Big Book Summer. So I am tagging Ellen Made Book Club, Berna's Bookish Adventures, and Beth's Bookish Reviews. In addition, just because I owe her so many, I am tagging Melinda at A Web of Stories, because for a long time she tagged me in every one of her tag videos. And the first time she started drawing names, she drew my name. So Melinda, I think I owe you a few. If you haven't done this yet, please enjoy it. And I would love to hear your answers to these questions, even if you don't do a tag video. Let me know in the comments down below. What book would pair with your favorite beverage? What's a book whose cover caught your eye? What would you recommend as the perfect starter read for someone who doesn't read fantasy? And what book made you feel like you were part of a vibrant, glittering world? Any of those or any of the other questions here, please let me know in the comments down below, because as you know, I love to talk about books.